in South Dakota's Badlands, where ancient stone holds secrets and silence stretches forever, some mysteries vanish without trace. On the morning of September 15th, 2023, graduate student Marcus Rodriguez drove his dusty Jeep Cherokee down the gravel access road toward the fossil excavation site in Buffalo Gap National Grassland. The early autumn air carried the familiar scent of sage and dry grass across the layered Badlands formations. Rodriguez had made this 30-mile journey from Rapid City dozens of times over the summer, but something felt different as he approached the remote dig site. Dr. Sarah Chen's white research tent was still standing, exactly where it had been the day before. Her equipment hummed quietly in the morning stillness. The ground-penetrating radar unit continued its automated scans, emitting periodic electronic beeps that echoed off the surrounding rock walls. Her field notebooks lay open on a folding table, weighted down against the persistent South Dakota wind, but Dr. Chen was nowhere to be found. The paleontological excavation site occupied a narrow gulch approximately 15 miles northeast of the town of Scenic, in an area where ancient riverbeds had carved deep channels through layers of sedimentary rock. The exposed formations here dated back 65 million years, to the very end of the Cretaceous period. For 3 months, Dr. Chen had been carefully extracting what appeared to be an unusually complete Triceratops skeleton from the Pierre Shale Formation. Rodriguez called out his advisor's name, his voice absorbed by the vast emptiness of the Badlands. The nearest ranch house belonged to Tom Whitehorse, whose family had worked this land for 4 generations, but it was over 2 miles away across rough terrain. Cell phone coverage was non-existent in the gulch. If something had happened to Dr. Chen, she would have been entirely on her own. The isolation of the site was both its strength and its danger. Few places in the continental United States offered such pristine access to fossil beds without the complications of private property disputes or heavy tourist traffic. But that same remoteness meant that help was far away, and the Badlands terrain could be treacherous even for experienced researchers. By noon, when Dr. Chen still hadn't appeared, Rodriguez made the difficult drive back to the Whitehorse Ranch to use their landline. Tom Whitehorse, a weathered man in his 60s with deep knowledge of the local terrain, immediately organized a search party. Within hours, ranchers from across Pennington County were combing the area on horseback and ATV, checking the network of arroyos and washouts where someone could easily become trapped or injured. The Pennington County Sheriff's Office officially opened a missing person investigation on September 16th. Sheriff Mike Thompson noted in his initial report that Dr. Chen's vehicle, a red Toyota Tacoma, remained parked at the access point to the dig site. Her camping gear was undisturbed. Her GPS unit showed no recorded waypoints beyond the excavation area. Most puzzling of all, her satellite emergency beacon remained at the campsite, unused. Dr. Sarah Chen was 42 years old, an associate professor of paleontology at the Colorado School of Mines, and widely regarded as one of the foremost experts on late Cretaceous fossil formations. She had spent 15 years working in remote locations across the American West. Colleagues described her as methodical, safety-conscious, and intimately familiar with backcountry protocols. She carried emergency supplies, filed detailed itineraries, and maintained regular check-in schedules with her graduate students, which made her disappearance all the more baffling. Dr. Sarah Chen had built her academic reputation on precision and innovation. Over the past decade, she had discovered and described 7 new dinosaur species, each find meticulously documented and peer-reviewed. Her colleagues at the Colorado School of Mines knew her as a researcher who combined traditional paleontological methods with cutting-edge technology in ways that sometimes raised eyebrows among academic traditionalists. The Buffalo Gap excavation represented the culmination of 3 years of preliminary research. Chen had first identified the site using satellite imagery analysis, looking for specific geological signatures that indicated promising fossil beds. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in 2022 had revealed what appeared to be an intact large skeleton buried approximately 8 feet below the surface in undisturbed Pierre shale. What made Chen's work controversial wasn't her technological approach, but rather her willingness to excavate in areas where cultural sensitivities ran deep. The Badlands of South Dakota held profound significance for the Lakota people, who considered many of the formation's sacred sites. Chen had spent months obtaining the proper federal permits for work within the national grassland boundaries. But local tribal leaders questioned whether bureaucratic approval was sufficient for disturbing areas their ancestors had honored for centuries. Marcus Rodriguez, who had worked as Chen's graduate assistant for 2 years, later described her excitement about the Buffalo Gap discovery to investigators. According to Rodriguez, Chen believed the skeleton might represent not just a complete triceratops, but potentially a new subspecies with unique cranial features. She had documented unusual horn formations and frill patterns that didn't match established taxonomic classifications. But Chen's excavation methods had attracted criticism from other quarters as well. Rather than working with the large teams typical of major fossil excavations, she preferred small, highly skilled crews that could work quickly and efficiently. She relied heavily on ground-penetrating radar and 3D mapping technologies to minimize the area disturbed during excavation. While these techniques were scientifically sound, they put tremendous pressure on individual team members and left little room for error. Dr. James Patterson, a colleague from the Colorado School of Mines, told investigators that Chen had seemed increasingly secretive about her South Dakota work in the weeks before her disappearance. She had stopped sharing preliminary data at faculty meetings and had declined collaboration offers from other institutions. When pressed about her reticence, Chen had mentioned concerns about protecting the site integrity until her research was complete. Those who knew Chen described her as methodical to a fault. She maintained detailed field notebooks with sketches, measurements, and observations recorded in her precise handwriting. She photographed every step of the excavation process and uploaded backup files to secure cloud storage each evening. Her camping setup reflected the same attention to detail. Equipment organized and labeled, emergency supplies inventoried weekly, communication schedules maintained religiously. Yet for all her careful planning, Chen's work at Buffalo Gap had encountered unexpected complications. Tom Whitehorse, whose family ranch bordered the excavation site, had questioned the scope of her federal permits. While the national grassland boundaries technically gave Chen authority to work in the area, Whitehorse claimed his family held historical grazing rights that should have required additional consultation. More significantly, representatives from the Pine Ridge Reservation had begun raising formal objections to the excavation. Mary Crow Dog, a respected Lakota elder and member of the tribal council, had written letters to federal land management agencies arguing that the dig site fell within an area of traditional cultural significance that warranted protection under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. Chen had tried to navigate these competing claims diplomatically. She had invited tribal representatives to observe her work and had promised to share any culturally significant findings with appropriate Lakota authorities. But the tensions were clearly weighing on her. Rodriguez noted that his advisor had seemed increasingly stressed in her final weeks at the site, working longer hours and sleeping poorly. The pressure may have been affecting her judgment in other ways as well. Chen's excavation logs show that she had begun working alone for extended periods, sending Rodriguez back to Rapid City for supplies or research more frequently than usual. On several occasions, she had remained at the dig site overnight, despite university safety protocols that discouraged solo camping in remote locations. What drove Dr. Sarah Chen to take such risks remained unclear to those who knew her best. But her final research notes, discovered after her disappearance, suggested that she believed she was on the verge of a discovery that would reshape paleontological understanding of late Cretaceous ecosystems. Whether that discovery was worth the dangers she encountered in the Badlands of South Dakota was a question that would haunt her colleagues for months to come. The land where Dr. Sarah Chen disappeared had been contested territory long before the first paleontologist arrived with excavation tools. The complex jurisdictional maze surrounding the Buffalo Gap National Grassland reflected decades of federal land policy, tribal treaty rights, and local ranching traditions that often pulled in different directions. Tom Whitehorse's family had worked the area since 1924, when his grandfather homesteaded 640 acres under the enlarged Homestead Act. The property had passed through 3 generations of Whitehorse ranchers, each learning to read the subtle signs of weather and season in the Badlands' austere landscape. When drought and economic hardship forced the sale of much of the land to the federal government in the 1960s, the family retained grazing permits that allowed their cattle to roam across what became designated national grassland. But the Whitehorse family's connection to the land was relatively recent compared to the Lakota people's ancestral ties to the region. For centuries before European settlement, Lakota bands had used the Badlands as hunting grounds and spiritual retreat areas. The layered rock formations held deep cultural significance, with many sites considered sacred places where young warriors underwent vision quests and tribal leaders sought spiritual guidance. Mary Crow Dog, now in her 70s, remembered stories her grandmother told about the Badlands' spiritual importance. According to tribal oral history, the area where Dr. Chen established her excavation site had been used for purification ceremonies and as a burial ground for honored ancestors. The presence of ancient bones in the rock layers wasn't surprising to Lakota elders. They viewed the fossils as evidence of the sacred nature of the landscape itself. The federal government's management of the Buffalo Gap National Grassland added another layer of complexity to the jurisdictional questions. Established in 1960, the grassland was administered by the U.S. Forest Service under a multiple-use mandate that balanced grazing, wildlife habitat, recreation, and research activities. Scientific excavation permits were routinely granted to accredited institutions, but the process rarely involved consultation with affected tribal communities. Dr. Chen had followed proper federal procedures in obtaining her excavation permit. Her application, filed in March 2023, included detailed site maps, research objectives, and environmental impact assessments. The Forest Service had conducted the required reviews and issued a 3-year permit, allowing paleontological research within specified boundaries. From a bureaucratic perspective, Chen's work was entirely legitimate. But legitimacy and local acceptance were different matters entirely. Tom Whitehorse had discovered the excavation site during a routine cattle check in late June, 2 weeks after Dr. Chen had begun her work. While he acknowledged that the federal permit gave her legal authority to excavate, he questioned whether the Forest Service had adequately consulted with local stakeholders who actually lived on and worked the land. Whitehorse's concerns went beyond simple territorial disputes. His family had always maintained respectful relationships with Lakota neighbors, and he was aware that many tribal members viewed the Badlands as sacred space. The sight of researchers digging into rock formations that held spiritual significance troubled him, even though he lacked legal standing to challenge the federal permits. The situation became more complicated in August when Mary Crow Dog and other tribal representatives formally requested government-to-government consultation regarding the excavation. Under federal law, agencies are required to consult with federally recognized tribes on activities that might affect sites of cultural or religious importance. The Pine Ridge Tribal Council argued that the Chen excavation fell within an area protected under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. Forest Service officials found themselves caught between competing legal obligations. Dr. Chen's permit had been issued following proper procedures, but tribal consultation requirements created potential grounds for suspension or modification of the excavation authority. Meetings scheduled for early September were intended to address these concerns through negotiation rather than litigation. Dr. Chen had attempted to navigate the growing tensions diplomatically. She had invited Tom Whitehorse to tour the excavation site and had offered to share research findings with interested community members. She had also reached out to tribal representatives, expressing willingness to modify her research methods to address cultural concerns. But the stress of managing these relationships while conducting intensive fieldwork was clearly taking its toll. Marcus Rodriguez later told investigators that his advisor had seemed increasingly anxious about the political dimensions of her research. She had begun working irregular hours, sometimes starting before dawn to avoid potential confrontations with local residents who might visit the site during regular daylight hours. The irony wasn't lost on those familiar with the situation. Dr. Chen had come to the Badlands to study ancient life forms that had existed millions of years before human beings walked the earth. Instead, she found herself entangled in very contemporary disputes about land use, cultural respect, and the proper limits of scientific inquiry. By early September, no resolution to the jurisdictional questions had emerged. Federal officials continued to support Chen's research permit while acknowledging the need for broader community consultation. Tribal representatives maintained their opposition to excavation in culturally sensitive areas. Tom Whitehorse remained skeptical but avoided direct confrontation. And somewhere in the middle of these competing claims, Dr. Sarah Chen continued her solitary work in the Badlands, unaware that the ground beneath her feet was more contested than any fossil bed she had ever excavated. The first sign that something unusual was happening at the Buffalo Gap excavation site came not from Dr. Chen's disappearance, but from her equipment itself. When Marcus Rodriguez discovered the abandoned dig site on September 15th, he found Chen's ground-penetrating radar unit, displaying readings that defied conventional explanation. The GPR system, a sophisticated sensors and software Pulseco unit worth over $40,000, had been running continuously for at least 24 hours. Normally, the device produced clear subsurface images showing soil layers, rock formations, and buried objects. But the readings Rodriguez discovered showed something entirely different: electromagnetic patterns that seemed to pulse in regular intervals, creating wave-like signatures unlike anything in the equipment's reference database. Dr. Patricia Vance, a geophysics professor at the Colorado School of Mines and longtime colleague of Dr. Wu Chen, reviewed the equipment data remotely after Rodriguez uploaded the files. In a statement provided to investigators, Vance described the readings as unprecedented in 20 years of GPRR operation. The electromagnetic signatures appeared to originate from a depth of approximately 12 feet below the surface, well beyond the fossil layer Chen had been excavating. What made the readings even more puzzling was their consistency. Rather than the random electromagnetic noise typically associated with equipment malfunction, the patterns showed clear periodicity. The signatures repeated every 47 minutes with mechanical precision, suggesting an organized source rather than natural geological phenomena. But the GPR anomalies were only the beginning. When investigators examined Chen's other research equipment, they discovered that multiple electronic devices had recorded unusual electromagnetic activity in the days before her disappearance. Her digital cameras had captured unexplained light artifacts and photographs taken after sunset. Her laptop computer showed evidence of repeated hard drive errors, typically associated with exposure to strong magnetic fields. Even her satellite GPS unit had logged positioning errors that suggested interference from an unknown electromagnetic source. Tom Whitehorse provided additional context that deepened the mystery. During an interview with Pennington County investigators, he reported that his cattle had been exhibiting unusual behavior for approximately 2 weeks before Chen's disappearance. The animals, normally comfortable grazing throughout the area, had begun avoiding the vicinity of the excavation site entirely. They would approach within roughly a quarter mile of the dig location, then turn back as if responding to some invisible barrier. Whitehorse's border collie, a dog trained to work cattle and typically fearless around unfamiliar terrain, had also begun showing signs of distress when taken near the excavation area. The animal would whine, pace nervously, and eventually refuse to proceed beyond a certain point. Whitehorse, who had worked with livestock for over 40 years, had never seen such consistent avoidance behavior in response to a simple archaeological dig. The electromagnetic anomalies extended beyond the immediate excavation site. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a USGS geologist conducting mineral surveys in the Buffalo Gap area, had noticed unusual readings on her own equipment during late August fieldwork. Her magnetometer had detected subtle but consistent magnetic field variations in a roughly circular area centered on Chen's dig site. The variations didn't correspond to any known mineral deposits or geological features in the area. Walsh had initially attributed the readings to equipment error or possible interference from Chen's research activities. But when she recalibrated her instruments and repeated the measurements, The anomalous patterns persisted. Most curiously, the magnetic field variations appeared to be getting stronger over time, as if some underground source was gradually increasing in intensity. Ranchers throughout the broader area began reporting similar problems with their equipment in early September. Radio communications experienced periodic static bursts that seemed to originate from the direction of the excavation site. GPS systems in farm vehicles occasionally showed positioning errors of several hundred feet. Even analog equipment seemed affected. Mechanical clocks in ranch houses within a 5-mile radius had begun running slow by consistent amounts. The electromagnetic interference reached its peak during the 3 days immediately before Dr. Chen's disappearance. According to data recovered from various sources, electromagnetic readings on September 11th, 12th, and 13th showed dramatic spikes that far exceeded anything recorded previously. Then, abruptly on September 15th, the readings returned to normal levels. What made this timeline particularly significant was its correlation with Chen's final research activities. Her field notebooks, discovered after her disappearance, showed that she had been working to expose a section of the fossil skeleton that lay deeper than her original excavation plan had anticipated. Her notes from September 11th indicated excitement about unusual geological features associated with the fossil bed, though she provided no detailed description of what she had found. Federal investigators from the National Institute of Standards and Technology eventually examined the electromagnetic data at the request of the Forest Service. Their preliminary analysis confirmed that the readings represented genuine electromagnetic phenomena rather than equipment malfunctions. However, they were unable to identify any natural or artificial source that could account for the observed patterns. The NIST report noted that electromagnetic anomalies of this type were occasionally associated with geological instability, underground water movement, or even archaeological features containing metallic materials. But none of these explanations adequately accounted for the periodicity, intensity, and timing of the Buffalo Gap readings. By mid-October, 6 weeks after Dr. Chen's disappearance, the electromagnetic anomalies had largely subsided. Tom Whitehorse reported that his cattle had returned to normal grazing patterns throughout the area. Electronic equipment functioned normally. The mysterious electromagnetic signatures that had characterized the site for months simply faded away. But the questions remained. What had caused the electromagnetic interference? Why had it intensified during Chen's final days at the site? And what connection, if any, did it have to her disappearance? On the evening of September 14, 2023, at approximately 7:47 p.m., Dr. Sarah Chen made her final radio contact with graduate student Marcus Rodriguez. The transmission, recorded by the university's research communication system, lasted exactly 43 seconds. "Base camp. This is Chen." Her voice crackled through the static. "I'm seeing something unusual in grid section 7. The GPR is picking up a structure about 12 feet down, perfectly geometric. It's not natural stone formation." A pause then. "I'm going to do one more sweep before dark. Over." Nurse. Rodriguez's response was routine. "Copy that, Doctor. Chen. Be careful with the weather coming in. Storm cells moving from the west." That was the last anyone heard from Sarah Chen. When investigators later examined her field notebook, discovered 3 weeks after her disappearance buried under loose shale near the excavation site, they found detailed sketches from her final hours. The drawings showed what appeared to be carved symbols arranged in a circular pattern, unlike anything in the paleontological record. Her handwriting, normally precise, became increasingly hurried as the entries progressed. The final entry, timestamped 8:15 p.m., read, "Electromagnetic readings off the charts. Equipment interference increasing. Something down there is active. Need to document before." The sentence ended mid-word, the pen trailing off the page. Tom Whitehorse, whose ranch bordered the excavation site, provided crucial testimony about that September evening. From his kitchen window, approximately 2 miles northeast of the dig, He observed unusual lights around 9:30 p.m. on. Wasn't like anything I'd seen before, Whitehorse told Pennington County deputies during his formal interview. Blue-white flashes coming from down in the gully where that university woman was working. Figured maybe it was her equipment, some kind of generator or welding torch, but the flashes were too regular, too bright. Whitehorse described the lights as pulsing in a consistent pattern for roughly 20 minutes before disappearing entirely. When asked why he hadn't investigated immediately, he explained that the September storms had made the access roads treacherous, and he'd assumed Dr. Chen would contact authorities if she needed assistance. The weather that night proved significant to the investigation. National Weather Service records show that severe thunderstorms swept through the Buffalo Gap area between 10 p.m. and midnight on September 14th. Lightning strikes and heavy rain would have made any outdoor activity extremely dangerous for someone caught in the open Badlands terrain. But perhaps the most troubling testimony came from Mary Crow Dog, a respected elder from the Pine Ridge Reservation. 3 weeks before Dr. Chen's disappearance, Crow Dog had visited the excavation site to express her community's concerns about disturbing what tribal historians considered sacred ground. According to Crow Dog's statement, given to tribal police and later shared with county investigators, she had warned Dr. Chen specifically about the area where the paleontologist was conducting her most intensive research. "I told her that place has been marked by our people for generations," Crow Dog explained through a translator. "Not marked as forbidden, but marked as powerful. The old ones said there are places where the earth holds memory, where time moves differently." She was respectful, but she didn't understand the weight of what I was telling her. Crow Dog described pointing out natural landmarks that indicated the site's spiritual significance, specific rock formations, and the way seasonal water flows created patterns around the excavation area. She emphasized that the tribal community wasn't opposed to scientific research, but believed certain protocols should be followed when working in areas of cultural importance. Dr. Chen's academic colleagues confirmed that she had been excited about her recent findings, but also increasingly secretive. Dr. Robert Martinez from the University of South Dakota's Geology Department had spoken with Chen by phone on September 12th, 2 days before her disappearance. Sarah was definitely onto something significant, Martinez later told investigators. She kept talking about finding evidence that would rewrite the geological timeline for that region. But when I pressed for details, she said she needed more data before going public. That wasn't like Sarah. She usually shared her theories openly with colleagues. Not fine. The electromagnetic readings that had fascinated Dr. Chen in her final days remained unexplained. Technical analysis of her equipment, recovered from the abandoned dig site, showed that the ground-penetrating radar had indeed detected an unusual underground formation. The readings suggested a hollow space approximately 15 feet below the surface, with what appeared to be regularly spaced vertical structures. However, attempts to verify these findings proved impossible. When university technicians returned to the site with replacement equipment, they could not replicate Dr. Chen's electromagnetic readings. The underground anomaly that had appeared so clearly on her September 14th scans seemed to have vanished entirely. The coordinates Chen had noted in her final journal entry, 43.8574 degree and 102.3421 degree, led investigators to Grid Section 7, where she had been conducting her deepest excavation work. The area showed signs of recent digging beyond what her original research plan had specified, suggesting she had been pursuing something that drew her deeper into the Badlands' ancient layers. As darkness fell on September 14, 2023, somewhere in the vast expanse of the South Dakota Badlands, Dr. Sarah Chen encountered something that caused her to abandon not just her equipment and research, but seemingly vanish from existence itself. The only witnesses were the stars above and the ancient stone formations that had watched over this land for millions of years. By September 18, 2023, 4 days after Dr. Sarah Chen's disappearance, the search operation had evolved into one of the most complex multi-jurisdictional investigations in recent Pennington County history. What began as a standard missing person case had fractured into competing investigations, each agency operating under different legal authorities and pursuing separate theories. Sheriff Mike Thompson of the Pennington County Sheriff's Department coordinated the primary search and rescue operation from a command post established at the Buffalo Gap Visitor Center. Thompson, a 23-year veteran of rural law enforcement, had overseen dozens of missing person cases in the challenging terrain of western South Dakota. "The Badlands can swallow someone without a trace," Thompson explained to reporters during a press briefing on September 19. "We're dealing with unstable ground, flash flood zones, and thousands of square miles of wilderness. Our priorities cover in the most likely scenarios: injury, disorientation, exposure. Methodically and thoroughly." The Sheriff's Department deployed 2 K-9 units, a helicopter from the South Dakota National Guard, and 47 volunteers from local search and rescue groups. Ground teams focused on a 12-mile radius around the excavation site, checking abandoned homesteads, natural shelters, and seasonal water sources where someone might seek refuge. However, the Colorado School of Mines Administration launched its own parallel investigation, citing concerns about potential liability and the security of Dr. Chen's research. University legal counsel Patricia Hayes hired a private investigation firm from Rapid City to examine the circumstances surrounding the disappearance. Dr. Chen was working under university authorization with significant grant funding, Hayes stated in an internal memo later obtained through FOIA requests. "We have a responsibility to determine whether her disappearance relates to the research project, potential safety oversights, or other institutional factors." The private investigators focused on Dr. Chen's professional relationships, recent correspondence, and the valuable paleontological specimens she had been excavating. Their preliminary report suggested that theft of Dr. Chen's research or fossil discoveries could provide a financial motive for foul play. Complications arose when federal authorities asserted jurisdiction over portions of the search area. Special Agent Rebecca Martinez from the Bureau of Land Management's Law Enforcement Division arrived from the Billings Field office on September 20th, explaining that the excavation site fell within federally managed Buffalo Gap National Grassland. "Any criminal activity on federal land requires federal investigation," Martinez informed Sheriff Thompson during a tense meeting at the command post. "We're not taking over the search and rescue operation, but we need to secure the research site as a potential crime scene." The federal involvement created immediate friction with local efforts. BLM regulations required specific permits for any ground disturbance in the grassland, including the intensive search activities the Sheriff's Department considered necessary. Federal agents cordoned off a half-mile radius around Dr. Chen's excavation, limiting access for search dogs and volunteer teams. Meanwhile, tribal authorities from the Oglala Sioux tribe asserted their own jurisdiction under federal laws, protecting Native American cultural sites. Tribal Police Chief David Crowfeather argued that the excavation area contained sacred sites that required tribal oversight of any investigative activities. "This land holds significance that goes beyond state and federal boundaries," Chief Crowfeather explained during a meeting with other agencies. "The Lakota people have protocols for situations like this. We're not interfering with the search for Dr. Chen, but we cannot allow continued desecration of sacred ground in the name of investigation." The competing jurisdictions created practical problems that hampered the search effort. Search teams required different permits to cross from county land to federal grassland to areas claimed under tribal cultural protection. Radio communications between agencies operated on incompatible frequencies. Evidence collection protocols varied, creating confusion about proper chain of custody for items recovered from the search area. Dr. Chen's graduate student, Marcus Rodriguez, found himself caught between the competing investigations. Each agency interviewed him separately, asking different questions and pursuing different theories about his advisor's disappearance. "Everyone wants to know different things," Rodriguez confided to a fellow graduate student, according to university records. "The sheriff asks about Sarah's physical condition and outdoor experience. The university lawyers want to know about her research data and whether anyone else knew about her recent discoveries. The federal agents keep asking about permits and environmental regulations. The tribal representatives want to understand what Sarah might have disturbed at the site. Nero. By September 25th, nearly 2 weeks after the disappearance, the various investigations had produced conflicting working theories. The sheriff's department maintained that Dr. Chen had likely suffered an accident in the challenging terrain, possibly during the severe thunderstorms of September 14th. Their search continued to focus on natural shelters and seasonal water sources where someone injured might seek refuge. University investigators increasingly favored a theory involving theft or professional sabotage. They noted that Dr. Chen's recent discoveries would have significant academic and potentially commercial value. The private investigation firm had identified several individuals who knew about her work and had potential financial motives. Federal authorities suspected violations of multiple environmental regulations. Their investigation focused on whether Dr. Chen had exceeded her excavation permits, potentially triggering enforcement actions that might have prompted her to flee the area. Agent Martinez's team examined financial records for evidence of illegal fossil trafficking. Tribal representatives offered a different perspective entirely. Elder Mary Crow Dog suggested that Dr. Chen might have encountered spiritual forces beyond conventional law enforcement understanding. From this viewpoint, the disappearance represented consequences for disturbing sacred sites without proper cultural protocols. The electromagnetic anomalies that had characterized the site during Dr. Chen's final days added another layer of complexity to the investigation. While federal scientists confirmed that the readings represented genuine phenomena, no agency could adequately explain their source or significance. As autumn deepened in the South Dakota Badlands, 4 separate investigations continued pursuing 4 different theories about what had happened to Dr. Sarah Chen. The only certainty was that somewhere in the vast expanse of layered rock and endless sky, answers remained buried as deeply as the ancient fossils that had drawn her to this remote place. On October 12, 2023, nearly 4 weeks after Dr. Sarah Chen's disappearance, ranch hand Bobby Whitehorse made a discovery that would deepen the mystery rather than resolve it. While checking cattle on his family's grazing land adjacent to the excavation site, Bobby noticed something unusual protruding from a shallow wash carved by recent rains. Buried under 6 inches of loose shale and sediment, he found Dr. Chen's field notebook, the same leather-bound journal that investigators had been searching for since her disappearance. The notebook's location, approximately 200 yards northeast of the dig site, raised immediate questions. How had it traveled so far from where Dr. Chen was last known to be working? And why was it buried when the September 14th storm should have left it exposed on the surface? Sheriff Mike Thompson personally retrieved the notebook, handling it with evidence gloves, while Bobby Whitehorse documented the discovery location with GPS coordinates. The notebook's pages, though weathered by nearly a month of exposure, remained largely readable. What they revealed challenged every existing theory about Dr. Chen's disappearance. The journal's final entries, written in Dr. Chen's precise handwriting, described electromagnetic readings that defied conventional scientific explanation. Her September 14th notes documented equipment malfunctions that began around 6 p.m., nearly 2 hours before her final radio contact. The ground-penetrating radar had detected what she described as a structured void approximately 15 feet below surface, geometric in nature, inconsistent with natural geological formation. More puzzling were her observations about the electromagnetic field strength. Dr. Chen's measurements showed readings that fluctuated in regular patterns, peaking every 47 minutes with an intensity that should have been impossible given the equipment she was using. Her notes included sketches of wave patterns and frequency measurements that university physicists later described as theoretically implausible for the Badlands' geological composition. The notebook's most disturbing entry came from 8:47 p.m. on September 14th, more than an hour after Dr. Chen's final radio transmission. Written in increasingly erratic handwriting, it read, The readings are intensifying. Ground vibrations, detectable by touch. Something responding to the radar pulses. This isn't geological. Need to document everything before leaving site. If something happens to me, the answers are in grid section 7. Coordinates 43.8574 degree, 102.3421 degree, WWA. Those coordinates led investigators to a section of the excavation where Dr. Chen had been conducting her most intensive research. When Sheriff Thompson's team examined the area on October 15th, they found something that hadn't been there during previous searches. A perfectly circular depression in the ground, approximately 8 feet in diameter, with sides so smooth they appeared to have been cut rather than formed naturally. More mysteriously, when university technicians returned to the site with replacement ground-penetrating radar equipment, attempting to verify Dr. Chen's electromagnetic readings, their instruments detected nothing unusual. The structured void that had appeared so clearly on her September 14th scans seemed to have vanished entirely. The electromagnetic anomalies that had fascinated and frustrated Dr. Chen could not be replicated. Dr. Robert Martinez from the University of South Dakota's Geology Department examined Dr. Chen's data extensively. Sarah's readings show electromagnetic field strengths that would require a significant underground metal structure or an active electrical source, Martinez explained to investigators. But our follow-up surveys detect standard background levels for this region. Either her equipment malfunctioned systematically, or whatever caused the readings is no longer present. The mystery deepened when local ranchers reported that the strange electromagnetic effects hadn't entirely disappeared. Tom Whitehorse documented recurring problems with electronic equipment near the excavation site throughout October. GPS units malfunctioned, radio communications experienced interference, and vehicle batteries drained unusually quickly when parked within a quarter-mile of Dr. Chen's dig site. It's like the land itself got stirred up somehow, Tom Whitehorse explained to investigators. My grandfather used to talk about places where the earth held power, where modern machines didn't work right. I never paid much attention until now. On November 3rd, 2023, tribal elder Mary Crow Dog led a cleansing ceremony at the excavation site, attended by members of the Oglala Sioux community, and observed respectfully by law enforcement representatives. The ceremony, conducted according to traditional Lakota protocols, was intended to restore spiritual balance to an area that had been disturbed by Dr. Chen's research. We don't know what happened to the scientist woman, Crow Dog explained through a translator after the ceremony. But we know this place needs healing. The earth remembers everything. Our ancestors' footsteps, the ancient animals that died here, and now whatever happened on that September night. Following the ceremony, Tom Whitehorse made a decision that effectively ended active investigation of the site. Exercising his rights as a private landowner for the adjacent property, he posted the area around the excavation as off-limits to all future research activities. Federal authorities, after extensive review, determined that Dr. Chen's university permits had expired with her disappearance, removing their jurisdiction over continued investigation. As winter settled over the South Dakota Badlands in late November 2023, the case of Dr. Sarah Chen's disappearance remained officially open but practically dormant. The Pennington County Sheriff's Department continued to classify it as a missing person investigation. The Colorado School of Mines completed its internal review, implementing new safety protocols for remote research. Federal agencies filed their reports and moved on to other cases. But questions lingered like morning fog in the Badlands' deep gullies. What had caused the electromagnetic anomalies that fascinated Dr. Chen in her final days? Where was the structured void that appeared so clearly on her ground-penetrating radar? How had her field notebook traveled 200 yards from the excavation site and become buried under sediment? Most fundamentally, what happened to Dr. Sarah Chen during those final hours of September 14, 2023, in the vast emptiness of the South Dakota Badlands. The ancient stone formations, carved by millions of years of wind and water, keep their secrets. Somewhere in their layered depths, the answers wait, as patient and silent as the fossils that first drew Dr. Ralph Chen to this remote place where earth touches sky and time moves to rhythms older than human understanding. In the end, the Badlands had claimed another mystery, adding Dr. Sarah Chen's story to the countless others buried in stone and memory across this timeless landscape.